Hey everybody, welcome back. So today we're going to talk about one of the most common questions that we'll hear from folks, and that is, what's the best starter snake? What's the best species of snake to start with? And it's not always an easy question to answer because there's such a wide variety of snakes. Snake species range from, really small, safe, docile constrictors like ball pythons, all the way up to the massive constrictors like, you know, anacondas and reticulated pythons. And, they can be as harmless as your little king snake or your milk snake, all the way up to the elapids and vipers that are just absolutely deadly if you make a mistake with them. So, that being said, there's such a wide range of skills that are necessary to work with them, and such a wide range of species to choose from. And I think what you'll hear a lot of times is, if you're just starting with snakes, get you a ball python, get you a corn snake, and that's not terribly bad advice. If this is your first time tuning in here in Intrepid Exotics, we don't do any sales, don't do any breeding. I'm purely a reptile keeper, and we focus mainly on just helping folks understand snake behavior and handling techniques and things of that nature, particularly with the larger snakes, because it's not something that's real easy to come by all the time. You don't see too many people that really keep large snakes, so it can be hard for people to mentor and get hands-on and stuff like that. So we do our best to kind of mitigate that off the YouTube channel and so forth. So today we're going to look at some of the different things to consider, kind of based on what it is that your goals are. And it's going to differ from person to person. So I don't think you can actually nail down what the perfect starter snake species is for somebody. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and see how long we can keep Apollo here content before he starts trying to wrestle his way down to the floor on Intrepid Exotics. Whether you're a lifelong keeper or just getting started, help us encourage responsible keeping, conservation, and public education in the interest of keeping our reptiles safe and healthy as we protect them for future generations. You're invited to spend time with us as we experience these awesome animals together on Intrepid Exotics. So ultimately, I think, as with most things, the best place to start is with what you're passionate about. Reptiles are a lot different from just about any other pet that you're going to keep. Their care, their husbandry, they don't require as much attention as just about any other animal that you're going to keep. A lot of times they're perfectly content just being left alone, to bask, to their own resources. Feeding schedules can range anywhere from weekly to monthly to a few times a year. And, all dependent on the species. So, something to keep in mind is, what is it that you're fascinated with? Some people are fascinated with just seeing these small, colorful snakes, like some of these milk snakes that have got the red, yellow, and black bands on them, and just really colorful. Or some of the tree pythons, emerald tree boas. Come on, bud. That you'll see that, a lot of people think are just display animals that really don't like to interact with people that much. And, all of that stuff's well and good. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Those are real easy animals to start with. But what if you're one of those people that, is more tactile and really likes to interact more with your animals and stuff? Then your larger constrictors are going to be where that's at. Just like this Burmese python right here. Although he's a big snake, he's strong, and he requires more space than the smaller snakes do. They can be fairly easy animals to work with. I've known people that, the first snake that they ever touched was a reticulated python. The first snake that they ever kept was a reticulated python, and they've been doing absolutely fantastic with that animal through the whole time of keeping her. And it all really boils down to, what's the level of time you're willing to invest in learning about that animal? You really don't have, you don't have a whole lot to learn if you're keeping a smaller species like a ball python or something. You can go on in the course of a day, find a reputable site that shows you how to set up the enclosure, what they need, what their requirements are, some best practices with them, and they're really forgiving. They're pretty hardy animals. So you can get started with a ball python in a matter of no time, really. Some of the larger snakes, the care is really similar. The only real difference is that you're going to have a larger animal. You're going to have a greater potential for harm if you make a mistake. They're going to take, larger food. And on the other side of that coin, they can be a lot more rewarding to keep than, say, your ball python or your typical colubrids, your smaller snakes like that. They can be more interactive, and they can really be a lot more fun to work with, from my perspective. I've just always enjoyed working with the big snakes, so it's not like my smaller snakes don't get handled, don't get any attention, but they don't get as much handling and as much attention as my larger ones do. If for no other reason, I make sure that the larger ones are able to get out and get the exercise that they need, just so they can stay healthy. Now, you guys will see sometimes I've got another Burmese python, my female, upstairs, and she's just maybe 4 to 5 feet long right now. At that size, when you're starting out with them, they can be just as easy to manage as a ball python, if not more so, because they tend to have a little bit more stable feeding habits. Ball pythons are notorious for just arbitrarily going off of food and really frustrating newer keepers, which is about the only reason you'll hear somebody really not recommend them, because if you think you need to go in and feed that animal every week, and you get those couple weeks where they just decide, I don't want to eat today, and really stress out newer keepers. Plus, it takes a little bit of experience to be able to look at the animals and see how healthy they are, to understand that this is an acceptable time to go off food, and when that becomes unacceptable, when you start seeing signs that the animal may be sick or not feeling well or something, or that there's another reason behind it. So even with the simple snakes, there's still a lot of stuff to learn. But from a starting point, they tend to be pretty easy to keep. Now, we're talking about options, what different animals are available. And depending on where you are, sometimes every animal is available. And in some places, they've got different rules and laws for or against certain animals, things of that nature. And to really oversimplify the categories of snakes that you're looking at, I find that you can really break them down into 3 basic categories. And those are smaller constrictors, large constrictors, and venomous. Just about any snake that you can think of is going to fall into one of those categories. The safest of which always being the small constrictors. They're not big enough to where they can physically hurt you. If they bite you, it's not venomous. The bites are medically insignificant. Some of them just kind of feels like rubbing Velcro on you. Then you step up to large constrictors, and those are snakes that they're strong enough to where they can hurt you under the right circumstances. And although their bites aren't venomous, if they do bite, they can be medically significant. It all depends on how you manage it, the size of the snake, things of that nature. And then, of course, there's venomous snakes, which, if you've never worked with snakes before, absolutely don't ever start with venomous snakes. If you've never worked with anything except constrictors, if you've never worked with venomous snakes before, my opinion is that you do not get one that you're solely responsible for until you've mentored with somebody who knows what they're doing, who can teach you the proper ways to work with them. Because even though snakes don't require a lot of attention, there are times that they require attention, and you've got to interact with that animal in some way, shape, or form. So they've got to be fed. Their water's got to be refreshed. Their enclosures have got to be cleaned. Sometimes they've got to be transported to the vet, things of that nature. They've got to have their enclosures upgraded and changed. They've got to be moved. So anybody that's never worked with a venomous snake before, definitely not a good idea unless you find somebody that's competent, that you can learn from, and really invest a lot of time in working with some different species when you've got an expert there that can help you learn the right way to do it. Now, with that being said, I pretty much rule out any venomous snakes as first snake. No matter how much research that you do ahead of time, no matter how much you read, until you've got the hands-on experience, then it's definitely a no-no. Now, stepping back a little bit to larger constrictors, this can fall into the category mainly you're talking about your Burmese, your retics, your rock pythons, Some species of boa that can get pretty sizable. Yeah. What are you doing up there? But so these are all snakes that can get over, 9-10 feet long. Typically, when we talk about a snake being big, we're generally thinking of something like over 12 feet long. Biggest snakes that you'll typically work with are going to be in a 20-foot range, and those animals can be really, really fun to work with. But of course, there's techniques, because an animal that big, you just can't go into it new and think you're going to rustle it around and do the right thing with it. The consequences are a little bit more severe than if you're trying to work with a ball python or a little king snake or something like that. And you've got your easiest level of snakes, and that's pretty much what I call your smaller constrictors. That's your king snakes, corn snakes, rat snakes, ball pythons, hognose snakes, which are technically venomous but medically insignificant to the point to where we don't really work with or treat them as if they're venomous. So if we're talking about keeping smaller constrictors, really not too much of a learning curve. They're easy to care for, easy to, the husbandry is really easy on them. And then when we're talking about venomous snakes, absolutely not advisable under any circumstances for a new keeper that's inexperienced to ever get a venomous snake for any reason. That's something that requires a lot further education and experience before you're solely responsible for them. And moving into large constrictors, it's kind of a middle ground. You can get a new keeper and, say for instance, get yourself a little boa constrictor. That small snake, you're going to have an opportunity to continue to learn, continue to gain experience with that animal as it grows, and you've got plenty of time to learn all the proper techniques to handle and manage them. Plus you're building a relationship with the animal, and those can be perfectly safe, perfectly great, awesome animals to keep. Moving up into the Burmese retics, and I'm going to leave anacondas out of this because they can have a reputation for not being quite as friendly necessarily as, say, a retic or a Burm. This Burmese right here is the sweetest animal alive. Never worry about this animal biting, taking any kind of hostile acts toward me, because he's just really well socialized and trusting. Same thing with my reticulated python. Although they tend to be a little bit more on point and reactive, I still trust mine. Once I've got them out of the enclosure and I'm working with them, no worries at all about getting bit and stuff. Now, when you're starting out, if you're really fascinated with the bigger snakes, there's a couple things you can do. But they are going to require a commitment on your part. You can't go part way in and then quit, because you're going to run into problems later. Say for instance, you're just absolutely in love with reticulated pythons. You've got the space for them. You're just fascinated with working with an animal that can get 18-20 feet long. Well, cool. You can start with one of those, just like you can start with a ball python. The difference is you need to understand ahead of time that you're going to need more space available to them. You're going to need to acquire larger prey items. A large snake can put down a 9-10 pound rabbit very easily. So you're going to have access to those things. And you're going to have to, much like with the venomous snakes, find a way of mentoring yourself into caring for that animal and handling it as it gets bigger. You're going to have some time. If you get a young reticulated python, starts off at a couple feet, 2-3 feet, whatever the case may be, you're going to have time to grow with it. It's going to be real easy to manage at those smaller sizes. As you get up and that animal starts to get up 10, 12, 14 feet, oh my God, come on, you. Okay, now back to wherever I was. I had to adjust my Burmese, who's really wanting to get down and run around. But if you're going to get started with a larger snake, a larger constrictor like a Burma or a retic or something like that, it's perfectly fine to get them as babies. Spend that time working and growing with them and so forth, and knowing the size of enclosure you're going to run into and the food you're going to need. But during that time, while that snake's growing up, it's really, really advisable to find somebody that can really mentor you and working with those animals when they get bigger. You know, handling different species is pretty much the same across the board when we're talking about non-venomous stuff. Behaviors are real similar. How you interact with them is really similar. But when you get into the larger constrictors, I see it kind of frequently with folks that don't really have the hands-on experience working with really big snakes. And as their snake starts to get bigger, they start to get intimidated by it. And rightfully so. I mean, if you've never worked with a large snake before, and your snake starts to get big, you know, you may have had a perfect relationship all that time. I see it a lot. And then all of a sudden, when that snake starts getting big, the person starts getting hesitant. And that hesitance just really transfers into the relationship with that animal. And, you know, you start getting calls from folks saying, man, you know, this animal's not acting the same. It's not, you know, it seems like it hates me now. And, you know, it has a lot to do with what we portray to that animal as far as our own hesitation and stuff. So it's really important, if you are, you know, a really big fan of big snakes, you really want to have one, then, you know, by all means, go out, get one, work with it. But as part of that process, make sure that you're getting lined up with somebody reputable that has big snakes, preferably somebody that's got several, maybe a couple that aren't so nice, so that you can, you know, really get down and dirty and work with the animals and understand, okay, if this snake is really cantankerous and I need to get him out of his enclosure and he doesn't want to come out of his enclosure, this is how I can do it. This is how I can manage him to keep him from getting stressed out and to keep myself from getting hurt. So that kind of mentorship is really, really important. And then you just put all of that stuff into practice with your own animal. And these larger snakes can be perfectly safe to work with. You've just got to invest the time into learning how to do all that stuff right. So, I mean, you know, those are kind of my thoughts on the whole subject. You can't tell somebody, this is your first snake, you got to get a ball python. A person may not be happy, they may not be interested in that little ball python at all. Just like you can't tell somebody, perfectly fine to get a big constrictor as your first snake. They may not want to put that much effort in. They may not have enough space for whatever reason. So it's really tough to nail down some blanket statement saying, this is a best starter snake. And like I said, you're going to hear a lot of different opinions on it, but it really is all based on the keeper. What their motivation is, what their level of commitment is to learning that animal, what resources they have available to them. And, you know, it's one thing that I think is kind of a responsibility for all of us to keep, is not necessarily to discourage people and gatekeep. Because we think that we're the only ones tough enough to handle this big snake or whatever the case may be, because I've seen some very small people successfully manage snakes. It's not a matter of being tough. It's a matter of being understanding. And, you know, running that, just like we talk about all the time, running that balance between confidence and caution all the time, understanding the animals. And if you do that with any of them, you're going to have a pretty good outcome. So, I don't know how many of you are disappointed because I didn't just come out and say, man, this is the best species of snake to keep, period, hands down, this is the answer to your question. Some questions there's just not that kind of an answer for. And when you're dealing with different people and different animals, things like that, there's different matches available. And, you know, what's good for one person, one animal, may not be good for another person or animal. So, something to think about. If you guys want to see some more stuff on reticulated pythons, I've got a really good video that we put out not too long ago on, you know, size comparisons between like male and female reticulated pythons. And, you know, going through the list, there's all kinds of stuff on handling and feeding and reading behaviors and stuff like that you guys can check out too. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that reticulated python in the end screen right here, so you guys can check that out. And by all means, if you've got any questions, comments, throw them down there. I try to get to everything that comes in and answer everything accordingly. And you guys have an outstanding rest of the weekend, and we'll see you next time on Intrepid Exotics.